content over everything.
I won't be able to say,
That was the brother that was talking about the Magi and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, what you guys watched
Yeah, I
there?
see it. Talking about the Magi, I see your little video.
What's the time anyway, man? I think I might have to duck out.
And I was
still.
going to chat to you about
Yeah, he kind of frustrated me still when I saw him. Like,
you talking about Zoroastrians and the fire.
We're getting that a bit more.
But even when I watched a bit of that, but I mean, there's different traditions about
I was just
the
getting
Magi.
fobbed off because I came in, the Christians were like, oh yeah, he's on our side.
Yeah.
When they realised I wasn't, the Muslims came behind me, they were like, no, he's backing us up. Actually, I was just in the, straight down the middle.
There you go.
I didn't find he wasn't on my side from the get-go.
I vaguely remember, what you were saying is true, but I vaguely remember some of the stuff. But according in the Bible, God can use like people that are not Israelites to do his will. Because when you're talking about Cyrus being a Messiah, yes, he wasn't like an Israelite, but God used him to free like the Israelites.
But I don't. Did you understand what my point I was
you were
making,
saying that God couldn't do that.
No, that's not what.
Because Balaam, remember Balaam as well.
Yeah, I know that, but I use Balaam to say that it's not always Israelites. Anyway, that wasn't my point. My point was, these three wise men, or no, these wise men. Forget the three.
No. Let's say this. These magicians.
These Magi.
The word magus or Magi means magicians.
These magicians.
Continue.
No.
Continue. Let's just get that down.
They have the same root word.
But
it doesn't mean magician.
It does mean magician.
No, but it can encompass like astrologers or like different things, I think.
Oh yeah, if people don't understand stuff, then that's what they put it down to, innit? They put down science to magic and whatever. So my point was, right, in the whole context of things, God didn't send an Israelite. It's multifaceted. So he didn't send an Israelite prophet to Christ to worship him, and then for that prophet to go back to his people, and then say to him, a Christ has been born. That was my first thing. But then secondly, these wise men, these Magi, have observed the pattern in the sky, right? And that's indicated to them that a king's to be, a Messiah to be born. What was the sign that they saw? What was it that led them to that? Were they using astrology? Is astrology something that is permitted or encouraged from an Israelite standpoint? I thought it wasn't, but I've been hearing more and more stuff that makes me think that it actually was. But then my point is that these Magi, these astrologers, they came and apparently worshipped Christ. Now Christians use that as like a precedent. They use it as a precedent to say
legitimization.
Their whole point. Their whole point was why would these people, like for example, who came to the no one came to Muhammad's birth. But then these people came to Christ for some particular reason.
No, but let me make my point.
Not only that, it's not even just the wise man. It's not even that. The main thing
if we're going by the text.
I understand.
I don't, bro. I just wouldn't even.
So I refer to Cyrus in that debate. Because Cyrus is someone that we can go to across national sources to verify his existence. So these Magi, where else do they appear? If they were sent by Herod, I believe is what it says in
they went to him first to ask about the king of the Jews.
Okay, so they were from somewhere. Right? So are their sources? Do their sources corroborate that claim?
Oh, we don't have any more sources on this.
We only have
that's what I said, based on the text.
But the point that we have that connects the two anyway, regardless of their source or not, who they went to, King Herod, who we do know of, was an Israelite, right? Or he did follow, he did practice.
He was he wasn't a proper Jew.
He wasn't a proper Jew, but he did practice, and he knew of the prophecy.
He knew he was going to get misplaced and whatever.
Hence why he said, when you go and find this child, come back and give us news so that we may go and worship him. We, as in the congregation that he was ruling. So that's to show you that both of them, both the Magi and him, knew of some sort of prophecy.
So listen to this.
To do with this.
So both the Magi and the fake Jew were talking about worshipping Christ. But my man weren't even talking about worshipping him. Because really what he wanted to do is go and kill him.
No one knows.
He wanted to go.
That was intentional.
That was
right.
intent, yeah.
So then, but my point is, so isolated to the Magi's, is that they came and said, okay, King of Jews,
Seen and not seen.
Then they worshipped.
Heard and not heard.
Then there's no word of whether they went back to their. Obviously, they saw a dream. They didn't go back to Herod. So they went back to the land. But there's no like elucidation as to whether they call their people to come and worship the Christ. Yeah, or they went back to a message.
It depends
saying,
if you read
so,
the Apocrypha.
Yeah. Right, okay. So if there's something from the Apocrypha, you can let me know. But
then
it would follow logically that if I've laid eyes, on the God of all creation, I'm going to call everyone that I know to that.
Yeah, but
I don't find
but you're
that.
making an
So it's a
argument
bit-
from silence that because it's not included in the Bible.
No, I'm not saying this
therefore-
because it's included. I'm saying it.
But then how
I'm
do
saying
you
this-
know they didn't?
Can I contribute?
For
No,
example.
it's not about whether you have to show me they did. It's
Well,
not.
that's again, that's an argument from silence because the Bible's
Argument
not
from what?
focused. Argument from silence, trying to say, because we don't see it. Like
Yeah, I'm saying
like
so.
we-
Whether it's an
I'm
argument
saying-
from silence, whether you think it's a fallacy or not,
Yeah.
I think it's valid. That if you're saying that these people's actions is a precedent, then I need to. You can't just show me one event and say just on this one event. Yeah?
Hand up.
Sorry.
Or maybe, they were the ones who protected him in Egypt. Maybe they're the ones who took him back to Egypt.
But I think that are they not Persians?
What
though?
do we know about these people?
Where are they from?
Okay, so there was the claims. I don't know who any of the guys were who you were having a conversation with last week, but one of them was claiming they're pagans from Arabia.
I was saying
I would say they're from Babylon or Persia.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay,
Hold on. Let me give you what the actual
Isaiah.
apostolic fathers actually said. They said they're either from Arabia or they're from India.
later.
Was it
Ethiopia. No. This is what they're saying.
That was a bit later.
Okay, but if
That's
they
what
said
they said.
Magi,
Or Egypt.
So they refer to
Three
it as
places.
Magi. So, but historically, what do we know about the Magi?
So for
They're not from Egypt, but
the
they're
earliest
from Persia. They're from-
the earliest tradition. There's difference in opinions, but the earliest tradition is
Persia,
that
sorry,
if you look at
Persia.
if you look at in the book of
are
Daniel,
my ancestors.
Daniel
So
was
we
made
can
head
talk
of
about
the
them.
Magi when he was in.
He's proud of his ancestors still. Like.
Let me
fill in the
it's
blanks.
Daniel.
Yeah, the Magis. You like them.
Let me find
Yeah,
it.
Anyway,
You man like them.
magician has acquired the word magician has acquired connotations. Right? Like you said, there are phenomena that people can't explain, and these people just seem to be practicing it. Okay,
Yeah, do you want to read it? Let me just.
Go ahead.
what we got?
No, we're good. Go on,
Okay.
go on, you say it.
Where were we? So my understanding that they were of the order of Zoroastrian priests, otherwise known as Magi. Yeah. So we can ask ourselves, what prophecy were they looking for at that time?
Correct.
So if we're relating the nativity to a festival towards the end of December, like as far as we can go back, Zoroastrians celebrate what is called Shabi Yalda, the night of Yalda, which coincides with the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. So they would have been looking up at the stars at that time anyway, because they're waiting for the longest night of the year. In Zoroastrianism,
That presents a problem, though, a little bit of a problem.
Okay.
Wait, let me land first. Let me land. and then we'll
So
touch on it.
in Zoroastrianism, Shabi Yalda is referred to as the birth of the sun,
Okay.
not the birth of the little baby
But
boy's son.
that is if the presumption is
That's
if we're saying that
problematic
December was actually the correct birthday.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say, that was what I was-
Of course,
Yeah.
of course, I understand that. I'm just relating our modern Christmas festival to what were existing Zoroastrian festivals,
Okay.
right? Yeah. So, I mean, like it's commonly understood that many of the Christian festivals coincided with Zoroastrian ones because the elite like military class in the Roman Empire at the time of Constantine were Mithraists, which is an offshoot of Zoroastrianism. So they were already celebrating Shabi Yalda, the birth of the sun, the end of the longest night of the year. And Christianity was a mechanism, adopting Christianity as the state religion was a mechanism for inoculating the Roman Empire from the influence of the Zoroastrian offshoot faith. So the reason why Christians in the Western world celebrate Christmas towards the end of the
So it sounds like they usurped one of your festivals.
No, it's not the only one. I can tell you where the Christmas tree comes from, all of that stuff.
Boy, so that's the issue then, isn't it? That's an issue for Paperboy to answer.
No, but going back to the Magi.
Yeah.
So, like in Daniel, well, basically there's a prophet called Daniel, and he gave a prophecies of Christ being born. Like he actually predicted the days that it would take for Christ to be born. So people argue that he had to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, and after that he was made head of all the like magicians, astrologers, and everything. So there are some early traditions which say he taught like a of the Magi who passed down this tradition. So that's how they were able to recognize.
He was a Hebrew, right?
Yeah, in Israelite. Like, here's arguing giving the verse.
What role do Magi play in the Israelite community?
No, but when he was in exile. So he was in.
I see. When he was in Babylon, he adopted.
No, but he had to interpret the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay.
So then after that, because
interpretation of dreams was a common practice for
of the Magi. Yeah, exactly. So when he was able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, then I'll just read out the verse. Well, it's Daniel 5:11. It says, "There's a man." This is talking about the son. It says, "There's a man in your kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel." So he was the head of all these people. The earliest kind of Christian traditions say that there was a sect that he taught, because he also had the prophecy of the birth of Christ. So, or it's either he taught them, or they were able to learn the scripture through him and be able to decipher it for themselves and pass this tradition down. Because he was the head of this guy. Because imagine if you're in a kingdom and someone's able to interpret someone else's dreams. All these people want to know, like, wow, what's behind this guy? And he's got a book as well which predicts the birth of the Messiah. So we don't have any concrete traditions to say who, but the early traditions, like from Christianity and the Church Fathers, like what you're saying, like the names and stuff came a bit like in about the 6th century, but the earliest traditions were like people thought they may have been associated with him.
So let me tell you the African version as well.
Please.
There's the African version, there's the Kemetic version, right? So all Jews know that 9/10, this they claim, 9/10 of magic was established in Egypt. Egypt is the home of magic, right? And these Magi, which were magicians, came from Egypt, right? Came from Egypt. And when I say Egypt, I don't even mean northern, no Egypt. Come from deep down, upper Egypt, south, where the sun actually rises, where the first men were actually born. Anyway, I don't even go into that. Anyway, and then in there is a prophecy. There is a prophecy that the Jews take on, called the Son of Man prophecy. Go on, do your research. Type in Egypt, Son of Man, right? And there's this messianic king that was supposed to be born to actually redeem the whole of Egypt and other regions as well. Just saying, that's the Kemetic or the Egyptian version.
What was the Isaiah thing you had as well?
The Kemetic word for Magi. There isn't.
What was that?
link to that word in that region.
That's the prophet.
An etymological link. No.
Okay, so the
Whoever talks about the prophet.
if we go to the Indo-Iranian languages,
Yes, of course. The word
Magus
is coming from like
but you're saying the practice.
Yeah. So this is
Coming from
about the whole prophecy about the Son of
as
Man.
far as
And look,
the Kemetic
when you go
narrative
down
is
to
concerned, it
60,
comes from
this is
from
what they
Egypt.
came with,
So we don't know the word.
Okay.
the word.
The people of that.
We do know
priests of that order.
we do know the words, but they're utilizing the Greek and they utilize the word Magus. The authors of the New Testament are utilizing Greek.
Okay,
They're utilizing the word Magus. No, I'm saying, but that's where the term comes from. It's from the Greek.
Well, that's where it enters the English.
But it has the etymology going back into like the Persians.
Yeah.
You dig what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But we're using the Greek, and that's what they say. They don't utilize anything else.
Even then, I wouldn't assume that it's entered the English necessarily from the Greek.
Okay.
Just given how the languages have travelled to these isles, right?
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to know what what the Kemetic
Keep reading.
language
All of this is this whole 60. You read it.
priests of that
Let me
order.
show you.
Okay, so
Because it tells you
you don't really get
exactly
told
what Jesus'
anything
name
about
was
the
gonna
order
be.
itself. You just told the Magi's or the Magus
So
or
they
the
use.
magicians.
Are you sure?
Like, so what sources?
No, his
explain
name
what
is
you-
in,
what
I
you
think,
explain to us.
Zechariah.
Where
No,
would
Zechariah.
I get that
I'll
information?
have to actually
Rather than
bring out.
Isaiah.
Okay.
You have to bring
I
out
would
for you.
appreciate.
Yeah, definitely.
What's his name?
Yeshua.
Not Yahusha.
Well, people have different pronunciations.
Yehoshua.
Yeah, that's the long form. Yeshua becomes the short form. But it's, yeah.
I saw a verse.
Like you can see within the Bible, like they use the same long and short for the same person.
But the question is here: why did Jesus have to go to Egypt?
Why did Egypt? In what sense?
Why did he have to go to Egypt?
For protection.
But why?
What, out of all the places?
Yeah.
Who knows? that's not stated. Because it was a
What are
black
we looking at the
man.
moment?
Nah, sorry. I'm just
Well, that's another
I
story.
want to look more into Daniel.
That's another story.
But then the thing is, I think Christ represents a typology of Israel in Egypt as well. So like Israel, you know, as there's the verse that says, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So Christ is almost like the fulfillment of Israel. Christ fasted in the wilderness 40 days and he overcame, whereas Israel was in the wilderness and succumbed like to temptation and stuff like that. So I think it's like it acts as a typology as well. Like,
It says, "Out of Egypt have I called my son."
huh?
Out of Egypt have I called my son, or love my son, and
I called my son, yeah.
and so forth, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be called? Called.
To be called.
As in to be summoned or to be named.
Well, we're looking at the kind of Israelite perspective. They were like Moses went in and was like.
No.
well,
I mean,
we've
like,
kind of
if
taken out.
you're called from a biblical or Israelite perspective, you're called, right? What does that actually mean to be called?
So a calling could be your vocation.
Yeah, but the thing is, the reason why I'm saying because that verse was used to relate to the Israelites. So in terms of how were they called, like Moses obviously spoke to the Pharaoh to take them out of Egypt into the promised land. So their calling, like, is just to kind of come out of this idolatrous nature.
No.
Okay.
In order to be called,
Yeah.
it's like giving prophecy. It's like giving prophecy. If you're being called by God, that means you can hear the words of God, right?
I mean, the revelation is being delivered to you.
Well, I would disagree because would we say the Israelites heard? Because remember, he said, "Out of Israel, I called my son."
The
So therefore,
Israelites
we
heard.
would have to say that every Israelite.
The Israelites did hear God. Remember? On the mountain, remember?
No, but you said prophecy. So to call them, they would have to have been in Egypt to be called out.
Yeah.
But they were already out of Egypt when they heard God's voice. So you said it's a prophecy, so they had to hear it. But a prophecy happens before something happens.
Okay.
So
So do you know the commentary on that line of Hosea 11:1?
I've not read it.
It's talking about pedagogy, how God loves somebody and teaches them and educates them.
Okay.
Right? And in order to be taught and educated, yeah, like for example, if you're being taught and educated in Egypt,
Yeah.
what was my point is, what was Jesus taught and educated in Egypt for him to
but
be called out of Egypt? That was going to be my point.
What was he taught and educated?
Let me back it. Let me go back.
because
Right? Let me go back up. Right. So, for example, Jesus had to go to Egypt, right, for protection.
Yeah.
Let's just say just for protection.
Yeah.
But he was called from Egypt, out of Egypt, or called from Egypt, right?
Well, not personally, no.
Not personally.
Well, not as
So
a
if
child.
he wasn't called personally from Egypt,
Yeah.
how does that prophecy relate to him?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's a typology. So it's trying to say, because when you see like how the gospel portray Christ is almost like the fulfilled Israel. So you see Israel is this nation which God calls his firstborn. And Israel kind of constantly contending with God, never fulfilling what God wanted with him.
That's right.
But then Christ, because
Christ was
Christ,
the fulfillment
so
of that.
it's more of a
He done
typology
everything.
rather than, I would say it's more of a typology or figuratively, rather than a specific thing in terms of Christ being that new Israel. So even if he wouldn't have had to be kind of specifically called to fulfill that, because it's not trying to go in that aspect. It's just trying to use a figurative example of Christ and mirroring like Israel.
Yeah. Go on, you don't cut it out, man.
No, I'm listening to that, and it's interesting what you're saying, because I've always wondered how you decipher like what is figurative, what is allegorical, what should be taken literally.
Yeah,
So
I mean
it's
it's not always easy, and I would say one is using the Bible to interpret the Bible. So looking at like verses, how something is used together, and then because like you might read something and think, okay, it's a literal meaning from the Old Testament, and see something in the New Testament and see it was like it wasn't literal. So, for example, when Nicodemus speaks to Christ about being born again, he says, "But are we going to go inside our like mother's womb again?" And he says, "No, it's a spiritual thing." But so I think sometimes because when we,
but the
for
correction
example,
is there in the text.
not all the time.
But for that, in that instance.
Yeah, in that instance.
Right.
So,
but you don't have that codex for the rest of the.
Well, exactly. So that's why it makes it difficult. Sometimes if you speak to like Hebrew Israelites, they might take something literal from the Old Testament and say, "Oh, but it says this," but then a Christian may take it in a different context.
Could one methodology be this? What sounds impossible is most probably allegorical.
I would say that
rather than taking miracles at face value.
Mm-hmm. Not with miracles though. because remember, like the Bible uses a lot of metaphors, allegories, typologies, and whatnot. So,
but the argument could be that the whole thing is an allegory,
but then,
right?
Yeah, but then if it's talking about, let's say, a spirit coming out of someone, I wouldn't say that is an allegory where Christ commanded the demons to come out of the person and into the pit.
Someone can show spirit, but they're not showing you, literally showing spirit, right? Like it can still be taken.
But would it be a metaphor for?
See, this remember the conversation I had about the Holy Spirit coming down as a dove?
Okay, yeah.
This is how it fits in. Did it literally, like physically, could you see the dove alight on Jesus Christ? Or was that something that was figuratively coming down upon Jesus?
Spirited.
Well, in terms of that,
because I would say what sounds impossible is most probably now figurative or allegorical.
Because I could say some people in the park, that guy's possessed. But not literally, but he's just going off in a.
But then when the Bible talks about that, like people being possessed, then it will say like the person was actually possessed with spirits, like evil spirits, because there was a guy who was like super strong, and it says that, I can't remember what his name was, but it says that people tried to cast out demons from him and he ended up ripping up their clothes and they ran off naked. The demons said, "We don't recognize your authority, we recognize Christ, we recognize Paul, blah blah blah." So it's kind of giving you the specific. So that's why I say with miracles it's different. I think the Bible, in terms of where I say sometimes how to interpret it, is especially in the Old Testament where it tries to talk about things to come. So there's a lot of kind of metaphors and allegories and whatnot. So it's not always easy just to read. It's not always like, for example, if you read the book of Revelations, it talks about dragons, it talks about Christ having a sword from his tongue, all this. But because it's written as a prophecy, it's not meant to be taken literally.
I think though with these kinds of scriptures,
but someone might,
they're intentionally made
obscure
and vague enough that they can be applied somehow in the future to say that the fulfillment has, they've been fulfilled.
That I would disagree with, and it depends on, because we have exegesis and eisegesis, and I agree sometimes people do a lot of eisegesis and read into things that aren't there. But then I feel like there are things, for example, even if you look at, for example, a Jewish understanding of certain things in the Bible, they will come to the same conclusions as like Christians, even though they may not have the same, always agree on the same thing. So, for example, like where Christ will be born, and I'll show you.
See, I want to jump on this a little bit later on with you.
Yeah, no worries.
We'll do a separate conversation. We're going to jump on this one.
We'll wrap up soon. We'll wrap up in a sec. So let me just show you something. For example.
Sorry, just to interrupt you, the extract that you read from Daniel earlier, can you tell me what it was so I can just have a look?
Daniel 5:11.
Okay, sorry, you go ahead and find what you're...
So if I'm just going to show you something from the book of Micah. I remember we have the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. So like, this is Micah 5:2. And it says, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephratah, who are too little to be amongst the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth from me one who is to be the ruler in Israel, whose coming forth have been from ancient of days." Now, there's two Bethlehems in Israel, and Christ was born in Bethlehem Ephratah.
Okay.
So now, for me, that would be a specific prophecy about the Messiah, because people would have to say, how did they figure out Christ was the Messiah?
So then we have to go to the sources that verify that happened, right?
Well, in terms of historically.
Okay, let's say fine. Right, we take this as the prophecy.
Yeah.
So what do we have that substantiates that prophecy was fulfilled? I mean, from a forensic standpoint.
I mean, in terms of, because I'm trying to think, in terms of the outside information that we have of Christ, I don't know if it talks about where the Roman information about him and the non-biblical. They don't really specify where.
You
was.
see the importance of that for an objective.
Yeah, but then obviously, but that's the whole point. The Bible, if it wasn't a link to religion, people would have no problem with it as a historical document. But it's only because it's ingrained with things that people think are religious.
Yeah.
Therefore,
I think once you start infusing the supernatural.
But this is an eye test.
People are going to start asking questions, right?
But then remember, the great thing about the Bible is that a lot of it is archaeologically and historically accurate in terms of when people, for example, Pontius Pilate in 1948, I think they found a plaque with his name on it. Until then, no one believed he existed. Okay. So there are certain things with that, like the Bible states.
But I think things like that are important, and obviously artifacts, they get lost, they get destroyed. I understand that.
Yeah.
Which is why, I mean, my personal standpoint is, all right, well, let's hold off until we have that. So we found something that showed us that Pontius Pilate, or the name was.
But it's like when we look at historical documents, the more kind of fabricated they are, the harder it is to find anything that aligns with it historically. Like if we look at the Quran.
Well, you said fabricated, so we're finding it difficult to find sources that substantiate a lot of the claims in the Bible.
No, so even if we look at, for example, Christ is like one of the best attested person of antiquity. So Christ himself could have been like a made-up figure, but then we go into so many like Roman sources, Jewish sources that attest that he existed. So therefore, like scholars will tell you, Christ was a historical person. They may not agree with the miracles, but the bottom line is he was a historical.
Divinity and so on.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, I'm sorry to keep going back to Cyrus. So for example, Cyrus lived 500.
But then he was a king. But Christ was, remember, but Christ was like
not in the official.
Exactly.
Right.
So this is a man like within. Like, I could ask everyone here, did they see you? No one would see you. You're just a single person. But remember, Christ is kind of.
We've got the.
Yeah, but this is 2019. But 2,000 years ago, you could wander in the video.
But it wouldn't matter what anyone claimed I said if we didn't have that.
Yeah, but we have to use our logic and say, if Christ wasn't who he was, how is he one of the most best attested person of antiquity? Because even you see, what's his name? There's a Roman, I think, is it Celsus?
Okay.
Now he wrote attacking the church fathers, saying this guy learned magic in Egypt.
Okay.
So this is someone who's a Greek or a Roman person, whatever, attesting that this person did, because he attributed it to Egypt. Mm-hmm. So why? I mean, he claimed that Christ was like a bastard child of a Roman soldier. That was the accusation. But he could have denied the magic aspect.
Right.
But he said, no, this person probably learned his tricks from Egypt. So if you're a polemic against Christian, you wouldn't kind of confirm like the miraculous. You would have just done a polemic against.
Well, he's saying the magical.
Yeah, he said he learned Christ learned magic from Egypt.
Right.
But if he didn't believe it, or people didn't believe that like Christ did these miraculous things, he could have just said something else.
That's a double-edged sword, because it takes you down the route of just like whatever the gentleman was saying before about Magi is a byword for magician.
Yeah.
They were practicing magic.
But then if Christ was practicing magic.
So what I'm saying is that idea was already in existence, like in the human psyche in that region at that time.
Yeah.
That there were people who could come and demonstrate
so then are we
miraculous.
So then are we agreeing that Christ did miraculous things?
No,
whether it's magic, I'm not. Obviously,
no,
that's my belief. It's not magic.
If you claim that, what was the name of this?
Celsus.
I'm saying, if your claim that Celsus said this is true, then it's suggestive that there was someone by the name of Jesus who performed
wonders that people couldn't explain.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Once we start elevating that to the realms of the supernatural, then we have to. Then I implore you to bring the forensic approach to it.
Yeah, but obviously we can't apply a forensic approach because we don't have enough information. But we have someone who doesn't agree who's not a Christian kind of attested.
Is it what he saw, what he heard happened? Like,
he doesn't say.
It like
he doesn't say
third hand.
He was, what century was he? He was about possibly 3rd century.
Okay.
So it wouldn't have been first hand what he saw, but it was strong enough for him to not necessarily negate that Christ.
Yeah, but even someone today could say that.
What's that?
Could just write off what they're told about Jesus as harlotricks or magic or illusions or what have you. So I don't think that necessarily.
It's not conclusive evidence, but these are things that we would say kind of. Remember, history is about probability. We can never prove anything historically. So history is always about the probability of something happening. So if we have
I think that goes in the pro.
I think so.
When you weigh it up.
Yeah, because I think when you look at a lot of the church fathers writing against kind of like the kind of polemicists against Christianity, and they're always they say things like, well, how can you deny the disappearing of the sun, the eclipse? You know, they're like, or the earthquake, how do you explain that happened? You know, so I think it would have been acknowledged that people would have known in a sense. Because, for example, like a lot of scholars now still can't give a rational explanation of why Christianity grew so fast, even under persecution.
But the same argument could be made about Islam, for example.
The sword. And even scholars like Bart Ehrman will say the growth of Christianity is a phenomenon.
Okay, but that takes me back to what I said earlier about the motivation behind the adoption of Christianity by the Roman Empire.
That was the 3rd century, though, and I can even read a statement.
But I'm just saying, I don't know. So you can fill in my blanks about the growth of Christianity between.
So even Bart Ehrman
would
would say, like, Constantine adopting Christianity had no impact on the growth of Christianity. It was just growing naturally by itself.
So to what extent? I mean, if you give me like some sort of statistical.
So by
basis.
the year 300, between the year 300 and 400, they'll say about 50% of the Roman Empire became Christian, which was about 30 million people. So from growing from a very small, obscure sect of Judaism to almost 50% of the Roman Empire within 300 years is quite.
I mean, okay, so that argument stands up, but then on the other side, the other 50% or thereabouts.
Pagan and stuff.
Well, so from what I've read, they were Mithraists. That was the other. So those were the two superpowers of religion within the Roman Empire, sort of following on from the dawn of Christianity, until Christianity was adopted as the state religion.
Yeah.
So if you can explain the growth of Christianity that way, how do you explain the prominence of Mithraism within that same power construct?
But then it was declining, though. That's the thing. So obviously they were in terms of the first 300 years, it was the dominant religion. We don't know how it. I don't know how it became the state religion or whatever people believed in, but we do know from the growth of Christianity that from this one person.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have anything to verify that claim about half of the Roman Empire or the numbers of 30 million.
I can get a quote from. I'll get a quote from scholars quote. Just give me a second.
It would suggest that the veracity of a religious doctrine is substantiated by the speed of its growth or the size of its following.
Well, I think you would have to ask, what would cause? It's like, I can talk to you about the Beatles. You probably don't care about them. But everyone knew about Beatlemania.
Right.
Why? Because they were apparently the greatest band ever.
Right.
So I would say...
There's also been lots of music that was definitely not the greatest, but sold the most records, let's say, in a given period of time.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is Michael Jackson, people know about Michael Jackson. Why? Because legend, when something is great, legend, word of mouth spreads reputation about something. So I'm just saying, in terms of Christianity, what would cause
just using that as an example, again, the thing that is most popular is not necessarily the best or...
Yeah, but what would cause a religion to grow so quickly, even though the earliest believers were persecuted? You would rather, if someone said to you, if you, let's say you're Zoroastrian, and Zoroastrian is like a false, maybe like you're one of the early apostles or one of the third, and this person isn't who he claims to be. And if someone says, give up your religion or die, what would you do? Logically, you'd give it up if you knew it was. You wouldn't die for something you didn't believe in. That's basically what I'm saying.
So what you're saying? Why did Zoroastrians convert? Is that what you're saying?
No, forget the Zoroastrian thing.
No,
because I'm saying
we have an answer for that.
Christ's earliest disciples all died.
Right.
For their beliefs.
Right.
So if they believe Christ was sort of
we don't want to go down that road because we can talk about the examples of like
don't say
cults,
much like
like
as long as they're close to the source person,
like cult deaths and so on, mass suicides and so on. So those examples exist.
Yeah.
But obviously they didn't. Again, just because of the devotion of the early followers. Again, I don't necessarily take that as a sign of the truth.
Okay.
The truth.
So I'll give you
inherent.
2 quotes. One's from Michael White, professor of classics and director of the Religious Studies Program, University of Texas of Austin. And he says, given the intersection between religion and politics that we find so characteristically in the Hellenistic Roman world, and especially within these major cities, it does seem incongruous that Christianity could have survived, much less grown to have been the prominent force that it would become by the early 4th century when Emperor Constantine would make it one of his official religions of the empire. And Bart Ehrman says, in the triumph of Christianity... That
doesn't inform us as to the sheer proportion of...
Yeah, this one I'm going to get to. So it says, Ehrman describes the Edict of Milan as the Western world's first known government document to proclaim the freedom of belief. At the time, Ehrman notes, Christianity probably made up 7 to 10% of the population of the Roman Empire. A mere 100 years later, half of the empire's 60 million inhabitants claimed allegiance to the Christian tradition. Ehrman declares, without hyperbole, that is absolutely extraordinary. Very little about the historical triumph of Christianity makes sense. When Constantine converted, the New Testament didn't formally exist, and the Christians disagreed on basic theological concepts, among them how Jesus and God were related. For those living at the time, Ehrman writes, it would have been virtually impossible to imagine that these Christians would eventually destroy the other religions of Rome. Ehrman rejects the idea that Constantine's conversion made much difference. That's
go back to where it said 10 to 15%, and then obviously there was the jump later on.
So it says the Edict of Milan.
Yeah.
As the world's first known government
Western world's first
document to proclaim the freedom of belief. At the time, Ehrman notes Christianity probably made up to 7 to 10% of the population.
When was the Edict of Milan?
That was like, was it 315 or something, 325?
So you're saying at 315 to 325, it was, according to this, it was 5 to 10% of the Roman Empire. And so then when did Constantine...
So then it says 100 years. So that was, I think, is it 385 or something like that? I can double check.
So we're talking about...
Let me check the edicts.
We're talking about, 65, 70 years, going from 10 to 15% of the Roman Empire to 70%, is it?
Yeah, so Edicts of Milan, the freedom of religion, was 313.
Yeah.
And the other, I think the other creed came, it was about, was it 5th century? Or was towards the end of the 3rd century, where other religions got banned.
So in fact, from the time of Jesus' life to 315, 10 to 15% of the Roman Empire. Yeah. So that's not astronomical.
But remember the persecution of Christians as well. That's why they say it's quite phenomenal, because it kept growing, because you had the early martyrs. Christians were kind of getting slaughtered left, right and centre. So it wasn't even that you just had natural growth. And that's why, for example, a lot of the stuff for Christianity like the councils and whatnot only happened after Constantine is because they weren't able to congregate together because they were getting persecuted. It's only after like the freedom, the Edict of Milan, that like bishops could actually congregate together and make up, like formulate doctrines and whatnot. That's why we get the Council of Nicaea in 325 or something like that. So that's why when you compare that to Islam blatantly spread against the sword. Anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is kind of romanticizing history, whereas like Christians are getting thrown to the lions and whatnot, and we have like documentations of that as well, like the early martyrs. So we have to ask what was so convincing that allowed these early Christians to die for something that was like a fabricated. But even if you say Christ was a magician, at least that is something for them to see and believe in, that okay, this guy did do some miraculous things. So if we go to the Bible, you might say, well, maybe they did happen, but they were just illusions. You know, obviously, as a Christian, I wouldn't like go with that.
You don't subscribe to that
position,
yeah.
But it could be an explanation for someone to say, okay, this may be a plausible thing that this person actually did do these people thought he did, but maybe it was some
my
sort of
personal
illusion
approach to like all things religious is okay. Let's remove the supernatural element, and then let's see whether these claims could have been made, you know, in some way at that time in that framework. So. Yeah, but don't get me wrong.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think when you look at the Bible, like they say, it's the best preserved work of antiquity. You know, and there's a lot of that's what a lot of scholars, whether they're atheists as well, they enjoy it because it teaches a lot about society at that time, and there's a lot of things that corroborate with like archaeological evidence. You go into the Quran, what can you learn archaeologically? Like, no Western scholar goes into the Quran and says, okay, I've learned this about history, let's go and dig up somewhere and kind of match it up. Because even if you look at pre-Islamic history, there's nothing that affirms that there was no Islamic poets or whoever that wrote about Abraham going to Mecca or Arabia. Like, why is all the information like disappeared? You know, it's like you go to Mecca now or Arabia, everyone's called Muhammad. But we couldn't even find any pre-Islamic poets called Abraham, Isaac, or Hagar. But it seems like every other nation, if you go to Israel, they have all like traditional...
It's like a trail of provenance.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I
understand.
People called Moses and whatnot, but it's like Islam, it's like a silence.
Yeah, I'm probably not the
best person to talk about
it. To ask about that. But maybe not now, but it'd be nice to talk in future about the Zoroastrian influence on the monotheistic belief systems.
Yeah.
So we'll hit that at some point.
We can do that.
What's your name, by the way?
People call me Paperboy.
Paperboy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Cyrus.
Pleasure
to meet you.
The Messiah. Call you that. Cool.
ContentCOE everything from your Benjamin. Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Since New Zealand terror attack, there was the Brendan Tarrant, the guy from New Zealand. Well, he was from Australia, but he did this terrorist attack in New Zealand. He had strong links with Martin Sellner, gave him thousands of euros in donations, had email links with him, which Martin Sellner deleted before the police were able to look through his computers. So yeah, it just pretty much goes through all those links, all Tommy's own kind of promotions of the